All right, welcome to day 3 of the Wisconsin Land and Water Conference for 2022. Today's the last day. I'll put in the chat box for those of you who weren't here early. I'll put a link to our conference hub so that you have access to the program and other details about what's going on today. First up, we have Chris Hamerla from Golden Sands RC&D. He's a 1998 graduate from UW-Stevens Point and a former Wisconsin conservation warden. As Regional Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for Golden Sands RC&D, he educates and engages volunteers on how to identify and manage AIS. For over a decade, he has monitored for AIS and worked with partners in 32 counties across Wisconsin. Hamerla's experience of invasive species removal, boy, this is quite a list, includes buckthorn, Japanese knotweed, non-native phragmites, purple looserifle, water hyacinth, flowering rush, yellow floating heart, European frogbit, and Eurasian water milfoil. Hamerla enjoys traditional outdoor recreation, cooking, and wildlife photography. I'm also going to be assisted today by Dan Zur of UW-Madison Division of Extension, who will be handling questions and answers. So if you have any questions for Chris as he's doing his presentation, feel free to use the chat box and Dan will help moderate those. All right, go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Kate. And yes, please feel free if there are questions during the presentation. I cannot see the chat function as I'm presenting, so you can kind of just interrupt me and I can answer those so they're relevant to what we're talking about at that time. This morning, what I'm going to cover is some of your counties out there, you may be aware that the DNR changed their outreach and education funding for aquatic invasive species. And it used to be competitive funding. I'll get into that more, but now your county is actually allocated funds annually. So I'll discuss that opportunity for you if maybe you're taking part of that already, maybe you're not. And then we're also going to talk about some different invasive species that you should probably be aware of. Some of these are going to be roadside, and some of them are going to be true aquatics. So that's basically what we're going to cover today. And let's get going. As Kate mentioned, I work for Golden Sands RC&D. Who are we? Basically, we're a non-for-profit. Our mission is to manage natural resources and human resources in ways consistent with sound conservation principles by working across county lines to address local concerns. And this will become more evident why it's important that we can work across county lines when I get into how we do our invasive species work. But we also have sustainable agriculture, healthy forests, and abundant wildlife programs. And we currently work across 13 counties in central Wisconsin. Other than our aquatic invasives program, we also have 2 terrestrial invasive programs. So we kind of dabble in both. Obviously, some of these species we'll talk about today could fall into either category. So I'm just going to give you a brief introduction about our aquatic invasive species program. So we currently have 12 of our 13 counties that are part of our regional aquatic invasive species program. And as you can see, I've got them listed out. We do cover a fairly large area. So that would be Taylor County way up there on the upper left-hand corner, all the way down to the Columbia down there on the bottom right. So we have a large area. We have 2 full-time staff and a 3rd person currently coming on to help with all the deliverables throughout those counties. So this new funding is called the Lake Monitoring and Protection Network funding, LMPN. Some of you maybe have heard about this. Again, the old grants system that DNR had was the AEPP outreach and education grants for aquatic invasive species. This just changed over completely across the state for the start of 2022. There were a few counties that were participating in it in 2021 and in 2020. But now the entire state is a part of it. So what is this? Well, these funds are actually, every county is allocated funds. And Kate, right now would be a good time to put that statewide allocation link in the chat. This will make it available to all of you out there. You can grab this link out of the chat and you can look and see how much money was allocated towards your county for 2022. I'll pick on Marathon County because that's where I live. They were allocated $16,400 and some change for 2022. Now, obviously, that amount of money isn't enough to run a program for an entire year, you know, every day. But perhaps a county, maybe you've got some staff that can take on additional responsibilities, and you could take that money on and do that, or maybe you hire a limited term summer employee to do this type of work. Or the other way is you can have a designated agent to do that work for you. And that's where Golden Sands RC&D has come in for our 12 counties. All the counties decided, yep, you've been doing this work for us. We trust it. We've got good partnership with you. So you can accept the funds on behalf of the county, and you can, you go do the deliverables that are required for that. So that's basically how our program is. The old grant system required match. So we were always looking to have volunteers fill out paperwork, track down, have the county track any work they were doing for invasive species. So we don't have to do that anymore. So that's a load of paperwork off. We can spend more time just working with people and volunteers, getting projects done rather than chasing them down, recording their time. The funds do vary between the counties. I guess I don't even know where to start with the matrix other than there's all kinds of stuff. And some of those things include how many waters you have in your county, population density, access to those waters, parking available. Those are just the tip of the iceberg of all the things that go in to determine how much money each county is allocated. I kind of covered the county or designated agent part, but the other nice part about this funding is we receive 90% of the funding up front. So that means you're getting all that money right away. With the old grant system for this project, it was pretty much a reimbursement. We did get an initial amount of money at the beginning, but it was a very small portion. And then the rest of it, you paid out of pocket and you were reimbursed at the end. So this is kind of a nice change as well, where you're getting 90% of those funds right up front at the beginning of the year and you have them to work with. And then the remaining 10% comes after you complete the grant, and that's when you receive that. Other than that, eligible expenses and progress reporting is the same as it previously was with the old invasive species education grants. The funding is annual, like I mentioned. It starts January 1 and runs through December 31st. So right now, even though we're just getting into the field season, it's still a good time to be thinking about these funds that are available to your county, because the pre-application deadline is September 2. So if there's any committee meetings where you need a presentation or you need to discuss this, now and getting that on your schedule is a good time to do it. The final application deadline is November 1st. And I did the quick work for you all. The funds per county range from about $9,000 to $22,000. So are there any questions on that right now before I move forward?
Doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment, Chris, but we'll keep an eye on the chat and let you know when they pop up.
Very good. All right, we'll move on. So what does an AIS program look like under this new LMPN funding? The previous funding allowed us to be out in the field a little more hands-on. This is a little bit more on the coordination side. It allows us, excuse me, to do technical assistance. Okay, what is that? That's basically if a lake group or the county is looking to get some grant funding and they've got questions on certain pieces of that grant application, we can assist you with filling those gaps in. It might be a lake working on an aquatic plant management plan, and they need to have a portion of invasive species in there. I can assist with that wording and programs to help make their grant better or their program better. Education on AIS impacts, prevention, and lake monitoring. So again, that's teaching people about invasive species. What are the impacts? How can you prevent the spread? How can I look at my lake and survey to see if we have anything? Those of you out there that are maybe have more experience or have spent more time dealing with this, it may seem like we've been talking about this for a long time. However, I always have to remind myself that every day somebody's turning 18 or 21 or buying their first boat or learning how to fish. So there's always new people on the landscape. Obviously, the last couple of years, we have seen just a huge uptick in people purchasing places on cabins. So you have brand new people that have never lived on a lake before. So there is plenty of opportunity to teach people about the stuff that they probably have no idea about. Training for Clean Boats, Clean Waters, that's the CBCW, or Citizen Lake Monitoring Network, that's the CLMN. And those are two programs that focus. The CBCW is teaching people how to be at the boat landing and do watercraft inspections to engage anglers and boaters and help get that AIS prevention method out there, while also making sure that they don't have any aquatic plants or water in their boat that they're going to take to a different lake or perhaps mistakenly bring into a lake. In Wisconsin, we do actually have laws that mirror that. It's when you leave the landing, you must drain all the water, you must remove all the aquatic plants, not invasive plants, all plants. So, and vice versa, it's illegal to come into a lake if you have any aquatic plants attached to your boat motor trailer or have any water in your boat. So those people help with that. The Citizen Lake Monitoring Network aspect is more of the hands-on on the lake. It can be water clarity, it can be water chemistry. Invasive species monitoring also falls under that umbrella. We help distribute equipment. So if a lake group needs some water chemistry equipment or they need some zebra mussel monitoring plates, our program works between the DNR, UW Extension Lakes, and then we get those products out to the lake residents or whoever needs them. Communication between partners, so DNR, lake groups, the county, UW Extension Lakes, others. Who are the others? It could be Wisconsin Waterfowl Association. It could be Wisconsin Trappers Association. It could be Ducks Unlimited, Trout Unlimited. All these partners are great eyes out in the field. They also work with many other people. So if they're discussing invasive species and prevention methods, then their partners are hearing it as well. Obviously, working between the county and DNR is just a great partnership with your land and water plans and helping the DNR meet their management goals on the landscape, as well as helping people on the lakes to keep the lake the way they'd like it to be. Statewide events. Across the state, we've got the Landing Blitz and Drain Campaign. Those two events are based on the Clean Boats, Clean Waters program, but again, it's a statewide event. So we put out press releases, so every county across the state should be getting the same message, and it's one of these days. They typically fall during the 4th of July and Memorial Day, or right around there. And it's a big push to help educate boaters at boat landings. So it's a lot of times we get television coverage, as well as the press releases out in papers and having people at the landings. Snapshot Day is a chance to set up a rendezvous site where volunteers can come and learn how to identify and monitor for invasive species. And typically those rotate between various counties. the people come, they learn about invasive species, but then we have predetermined sites that are in close proximity, and the people actually go out, they try out their monitoring, and they collect various species. They might be invasive, they might not, but they're anything that the people find and they want to learn more about. They bring those items back and then we go through them. So it's just a really hands-on way for people to learn more about invasive species and monitoring for them. So those are some of the big programs that we do as part of this overarching AIS program. We also help develop language, train lakes on using social media. If you need help updating your land and water plan and you want to put some invasive species language in there, we're available for that. So could be a variety of things. Sometimes different groups want us to write articles, or they need an update again in their aquatic plant management plan. Verifying AIS findings and populations, that's still some of the field work we're able to do. If you're on your lake and you find something that you're really curious about or you're unsure about, grab a specimen, call us up, send me a picture, or send your invasive species person a picture. And if we look at it and say, that looks like Eurasian water milfoil, it hasn't been shown to be in your lake, we can come out and take a look at that initially and assess how much you have, and okay, what's the next step? Okay, well, it looks like you have quite a bit. We're going to make sure you're in contact with the DNR, and they're going to help direct you moving forward. There's only, or the other side of the coin, boy, looks like there's only a few plants by the boat landing here. Maybe we can just get hand pulling and get it out. Obviously, we're still going to let DNR know of the finding, but then we can just set up some monitoring for it. Signage at boat landing. Those of you that fish, boat, or just in general have been by a boat landing, typically you'll see a large white and black sign that talks about the Wisconsin laws for removing plants and draining the water. I help provide those signs. I get them to the county. I help install them. So if they happen to get, or if you have signs that are already up and they get backed over, knocked over, shot up, stolen, whatever, I can help replace those. And then finally, coming up soon is the biocontrol program for purple loosestrife. And I can discuss that a little bit more with some pictures. At this point, are there any questions on what an AIS program might look like in your county?
We do have one question from Matt Kruger regarding an earlier slide you had up, Chris. When are the funding awards announced? It seems like it might be too late to be accounted for in county budgeting.
Yeah, so they're typically, I believe we found out in mid to late December. So I found out that I was going to have my 2022 funding in mid-December of 2021. I should let me clarify. If I sit down with the county and they want to, well, it doesn't matter whether or not they want to use an entity as a designated agent, or if the county decides we're just going to take the money ourselves and we're going to do this. As long as you put in your pre-application and get your final application in by November 1st, you're going to get the money. This is not competitive funding. This funding is there. It's yours for the taking. If you choose not to take it, or if you choose not to get a designated agent, the money, it's your money that you decided not to take. Now, the funds have to be used for these products that I've just discussed, but it's not a, gee, I wonder if we're going to get it. No, if you apply, you're going to get it. Does that answer the question well?
Yeah, Matt says, thanks for the clarification. And that's
Perfect.
The only question we have at the moment.
All right, moving on. And we've got till 8:45, correct?
Yes.
All right, so let's jump into some of the species that I think would be important for you to know about. Some of these are kind of high priority. Some of them are newer ones, and some of them you may be very well acquainted with. I do want to start with giant hogweed. I know some of the counties, or maybe quite a few of the counties, are dealing with wild parsnip, and there's great concern about it because obviously if you're cutting it or if you walk through it and you break it up, you can get the sap on your skin, and the sap will react to sunlight and it can burn your skin. Giant hogweed is the same. Of course, you can see me standing next to a giant hogweed plant there. That's the one on the left with the big leaves and the big white showy flowers. That's an adult plant. They can actually be much larger.
For some reason, Chris, we're not seeing images on this slide. We just see the text at the top. Not quite sure why that's happening.
That is a bummer. Because I was going to show you the difference between giant hogweed and cow parsnip.
You might try going back to I mean, we'd have the toolbar up top of your oh, there they are. I think, yeah, yep, now we can see them.
Good. That was an easy fix.
Yeah, the toolbar is showing again, but I think we'll be okay.
Okay. Giant hogweed, large plant. Again, similar to wild parsnip. If you get the sap on your skin, it will react to sunlight and cause really major burns on your skin. There are not many locations of this in the state. So it's a good one to look for. And I get a lot of calls every spring of people thinking they found it, because again, on that left side, you can see the picture of me standing there, and down around my ankles and knees, that is one leaf. So, I mean, these leaves are ginormous, but people often will see cow parsnip that also has very big, pretty jagged looking leaves. So if we look, one of the easiest ways to tell, if you look, I've got the two pictures of hogweed versus cow parsnip, and what you're looking at, this is where the stem comes up and you get a branch coming off or another leaf coming off the stem. So on the right-hand side, the cow parsnip is always going to have this inflated portion kind of wrapping where the branch will come off the stem. The giant hogweed will not have that. It kind of wraps, but it doesn't have that inflated stem. And that is really the easiest way, because you can see that on a plant that's 12 inches high or a plant that's 4 feet high. So without getting into it too much, that's just a great way to tell the difference. Oh, I also wanted to bring this up because a lot of times when we talk about invasive species, it seems like it's a battle that you're going to continue fighting on a population. But if you monitor for some of these things, if you understand what, and you know how to identify them, and if you can find them early enough, you can have success at removing them from an area. And that's what I've been working on in this situation. I'll show you a map coming up where we found this early enough, and we've actually just been digging it up. So I didn't even have to use herbicide. So I was called up by the DNR a couple of years ago. They said, we'd like you to contact this landowner and check up on an old population of giant hogweed. It was known to be here, but we don't know what the story is anymore. How much is there? Is it gone? This is in Portage County. There are, I believe, 3 or 4 known populations of giant hogweed in the state. Iron County has a small population. I believe there's 1 or 2 in the Manitowoc area, or Manitowoc County. This one's in Portage. Initially, when I went out there and met with the landowner, we found 4 adult plants that we cut the seed heads or the flower heads off, and we treated those plants. As we started to poke around a little bit more, we did find some smaller plants. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the one of my technician's hand. So that plant is maybe about 9 inches tall. At that size, it looks very similar to a young maple or even a young wild grape, but the leaves are very serrated. So we're able to tell the difference. And the stems have fine hairs on them. On the left side, my technician again, and this would be later maybe in June when that plant had a chance to grow up. And you can see now it's, probably about 2.5 feet tall, but already you can see how large those leaves are. And then the map in the background just shows all the locations we started finding some smaller plants. The yellow line there is the property line. So as we were on the bottom of the page, as we neared the fence line, I could look across the property line and I could see some other plants. I was able to contact that landowner and follow up for the last couple of years. Earlier, you probably saw that we started this in 2018. As of last year, we found one young plant. And all of that was through just digging the plants up and disposing of them. So no herbicide, and we seem to have it under control. We'll just have to continue monitoring. Non-native Phragmites. This is an important one for counties because depending where you're located, it may be a restricted species or a prohibited species. I'll get into that a little bit more here in a moment. However, those of you that are joining us from maybe Brown County, Door County, Manitowoc, anybody along Lake Michigan shoreline there, I'm sure you're well aware of non-native Phragmites. But as you travel west, get to the middle of the state, so as you start to get to Shawano or Green Lake or wherever you are, you start to see less and less of this. But what we do see is it is following the major highways. And I bring this up, it's a very tall ornamental looking grass, as you can see on the left hand picture, my friend's wife standing in a patch of Phragmites. That's in the winter, obviously, so it's dead and brown, but it's still easy to see. In the summer, obviously, the tufts are going to be a little more silvery color there. But it can be very aggressive. It can outcompete your native species. It can grow on land or out in the water. Here's where it kind of becomes important. So I mentioned that depending where you're at, it could be restricted or prohibited. The difference between restricted and prohibited is that's how DNR designates their invasive species. Restricted would be items that you can't move, you can have under limited circumstances, but they're very abundant. So things like purple looserifle or rusty crayfish, they're all over the state. We're not going to get rid of them. They're here, but we're trying to mitigate any movement. We're trying to manage the populations when we can. So that's the yellow section for Phragmites. Prohibited are items that are very, there's very small populations or they're not here yet. So the hogweed that we just discussed is actually a prohibited species. There's only a handful of spots. So in Wisconsin, as you move westward, Phragmites becomes very, there's not a lot of it. So the state is really taking an active role to try to stop the progression of Phragmites across the state. So if you have it and you're in the prohibited section of the state, there could be extra funds out there to help you control and or manage any populations you find. And if you live in the red section of the state, I highly encourage you to learn what non-native Phragmites is so that we can find those areas and get them taken care of so they don't turn into these massive stands. Purple looserifle, I'm sure many of you, depending what county you're in, some counties are fortunate to not have to deal with it very often. And there's counties, I'll pick on Marathon County, that we have purple colored highway sections during August. There's a lot of it. But it's easy to tell in the winter if you know what you're looking for. So this time of year is actually, if I'm going to take my dog for a walk, I keep my eyes open for purple looserifle because it's really easy to tell with the seed heads sticking up. In the center of your screen, you'll see that's a picture of a cross section of the stem. So the stems have squared edges. Sometimes it might be 4 edges, it might be 5 or 6, but they're squared off. So that in combination with the seed head during the winter helps you identify the plant. And of course, if it's depending where you are in the state, it might be late June or early July, all the way through September. The purple flowers are really easy to determine. I mentioned the biocontrol program earlier. That is the beetle that you're seeing there on the bottom of the screen. So we do work with volunteers and county staff. We'll go out, depending where you're at in the state and depending how the spring is, maybe you're looking at trying to dig roots in the next week or two. In my area of the state, center part, Stevens Point, Wausau, depending on the time of year, I may be digging roots at the end of March or the first couple of weeks in April. And I get those to volunteers that we actually grow. We're trying to grow healthy, large purple loosestrife plants. And then once we get into the first couple of weeks of May, I'll head out into some known areas where I have these beetles, and I'll try to collect at least 6 to 8, but preferably 10 beetles per potted purple loosestrife plant that I'm raising. We net these plants, we put the beetles in there, they eat, they reproduce, and if everything goes well, we can have up to 1,000 beetles per potted plant once those young hatch. And then we take those back out into our infested areas and release the beetles, and the beetles do the work for us. This works really well in areas that, maybe you have a lot of purple loosestrife, or it's just areas that are tougher to get to. So if you're in the middle of the marsh and it's easy enough to take beetles out there and let them do the work, then you're not out in the middle of an area like that trying to do management. And the project has been very successful. Getting a little more water related, Eurasian water milfoil, something I deal a lot with on lakes. But again, this is one of the plants. This is why it's so important to make sure that people understand to remove all the aquatic plants from their boat, motor, and trailer before they leave a lake and end up going somewhere else. Quick identification. Typically, there's 4 to 5 leaves coming off of a whorl on the stem. And if you look on the right-hand side, that is a whorl of leaves. The leaves, that's 4 leaves coming off in a whorl. They kind of look like a bird feather. We do have native milfoils that look the same, but that's a milfoil. We know it's an invasive Eurasian water milfoil. I don't know, can you see my cursor moving?
No.
Okay, then we won't get it.
I can see it. It's tiny over on the right-hand picture.
Yes, on the right-hand
there it
picture,
is.
on the leaf that's on the upper right-hand corner. All these little lines coming off of each leaf are called the leaflets, and you have to count those. If you have 12 or more on each side, you've got Eurasian water milfoil, or maybe a hybrid, but that's something for a different time. Curly leaf pondweed is another plant that we deal with. This plant is really easy to identify. It has these very wavy curly leaves that maybe they remind you of bacon or a lasagna noodle. But they have a serrated edge. 9 times out of 10 in Wisconsin, if you've got an aquatic plant that has a serrated edge, it's probably going to be an invasive species. It's a pretty true statement. But the unique thing with this plant is if people are coming to their lake maybe for the first time later in the spring, or maybe 4th of July, they might not ever see this plant. It typically likes to start growing in late fall, before the ice comes on. Then it'll just kind of hang out dormant under the ice, or in a year like this year where we haven't had much snow. Sorry for those of us in the lower part of the state, maybe those of you up north had a lot more, but sunlight still penetrates through the ice. So this plant may even grow under the ice depending on how much sunlight it gets. Then when the ice comes off, it explodes. So it's an early season plant. It takes advantage of having all that room when our native species aren't up. But typically by June, it's starting to die back. So depending on when people get to a lake, maybe they don't even know they've got a problem. And the upper right-hand corner there, that dark brownish spot in the center is the turion. And that's kind of the reproductive structure. So as this plant matures, it starts to form these turions. And as it begins to die, those turions break apart. They can float along and end up in the sediment. Sometimes they remain dormant for a few years, and sometimes they'll grow right away that following season. And I believe I'm going to end with European frogbit, and I'm bringing this one to your attention because this is brand new. Michigan has had populations for a number of years already, and this past year we found it I believe it was starting in Oconto County, and there was a fair amount of it. I wish I had something with better size representation, but they look like little lily pads, and they're approximately the size of maybe a $50, a little smaller than a golf ball. They free float. They're not anchored really into the muck. They're more of a free floating plant, but they can explode very rapidly. We also did find some in Marinette County. So those of you that are over in that area of the state, this is definitely something to keep your eye open for. If you're seeing a whole bunch of these little lily pad looking things in some of your waterways, it could be a roadside ditch, a pond, the backwater of a river. Keep your eyes open for it, please, and report anything that you find that's suspicious. One more, yellow floating heart. Again, small lily pad looking plant. This one does root into the sediment, as you can see in the right-hand corner picture. This is a success story. A coworker of mine that was working out of Rhinelander found an area of this up in Forest County. Yes, Forest County. And he said, hey, I found this small population. What are you doing this coming Saturday? I said, nothing. Let's go take care of it. The upper left-hand corner picture was 9:55 a.m. And for a reference, in the all the stuff you see on top of the water there, that's yellow floating heart. In the back of it, you can see there's a log coming out from the shore. That can be your reference point. If we move to the right upper picture, that was 10:50. And you can see the logs in the background. You can see how this population is shrinking. The bottom left-hand corner picture was 12:30. There's my coworker, John Price, and we were basically just hand pulling it. We were able to get our fingers underneath the rhizomes and just kind of roll it up like carpet. And by 2 p.m., we were finishing up, and you can see that area, and this is right next to a boat landing. So we removed all this material that had the potential of getting cut up by people accessing there. That was back, I believe, how did I put it on here? Yes, that was back in 2013. We went back a couple of times the following years. We would find 1 or 2 plants that were coming back, but since then, we have had nothing come back. So every once in a while, we find something early enough and we get lucky and we quote unquote eradicate it. With that, it's the end of my presentation. I can take questions. There is your CEU code for those of you that are maybe doing this for credit, and I'll open up for questions.
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, we do have a few questions for you. What is the best treatment method for Phragmites? That's a question from Luke in Outagamie County.
I know some folks have had luck with spraying it, but it's not a one and done deal. And many of these things are never a one and done deal. You know, you need to stay on top of it. I don't have the technical experience with, you know, the type of product that you're going to use or the concentration levels. But that information is out there, or I could get it to you after doing some digging. In very small patches, I have worked with some lake groups that found it where they had maybe a dozen stalks of Phragmites that were starting to pop up on their lake. Somehow it got there. And we removed any of the material, any of the plant material that was up on shore. And then plants that were out in the water, basically, if you could remove the rhizomes, great. If you couldn't, we just made sure that we were cutting the rhizome below the water level. You can actually end up drowning the plant if none of the plant is able to reach the air. So I worked with Gilbert Lake in Washera County, and that was probably about 3 years ago. And I just ran into the person about a week ago, and they said, it hasn't come back. So again, we got lucky, we found it small.
All right, a question from Chase Cummings in Dunn County. Is there potential for a similar LMPN program for terrestrial invasive species as there is for AIS? In other words, kind of a state funding funneled through counties type program.
Yeah, Not aware of anything like that at this time. To my knowledge, the best option would be trying to form a cooperative weed management program, a SISMA. I kind of showed that at the beginning of my slides. With Golden Sands, we've got 2 areas where we have that formed, and those are formed. There is terrestrial invasive funding available. Sometimes it's through DNR, the state. Sometimes it's through the feds. Sorry, it's losing my mind here right now. Forest Service. There may be other partners out there that have funding. Right now, you're looking at competitive funding for those. There's nothing allocated like this for terrestrial.
Okay, a couple of purple loosestrife questions. One from Hallie in Trempealeau County and one from Sean Esser. How long have the beetles been in use, and how far are the beetles able to travel?
Oh, great questions. I believe this project started in the mid 80s, so it's been around a while. There was a lot of work done to make sure that the beetles weren't going to be detrimental to our native species in any way or fashion, and they have proven not to be detrimental to any of our native species. They really do focus on purple loosestrife. The second part of that question was how far they can travel, right?
Yeah, right.
The nice thing with them is when you put them in an area that has a good population of purple loosestrife, they pretty much stay there. They're not going to end up, I'm not going to say not, you never say always, but typically they don't fly very far. If you've got an isolated patch of purple loosestrife and your next patch is maybe a mile or 2 away, the likelihood of those beetles moving is minimal or not at all. So you can really target an area that way. They don't end up necessarily killing the plant, but what they do is they damage the plant enough where the plant doesn't grow as tall, and it has reduced flowering and seeding capability. And the way that is helpful is that your native plants are able to compete for sunlight and space without getting overshadowed by tall purple loosestrife plants.
Okay, just about out of time, but we have one more from Sue in Door County. How many counties have taken the DNR up on its funding for AIS work?
I don't have that answer. I do know a majority of them have, but I was just speaking with the statewide invasive species coordinator 2 days ago, and she mentioned that there was only a handful of counties that did not take the state up on it. So I don't have that exact number, but I know there are a few counties out there. So if somebody is out there listening and you're one of those counties and you're interested, go ahead and reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you how you can look into getting that. Even if you're nowhere near Golden Sands, that doesn't make a difference to me. The money is there for you, and by all means, take advantage of it.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have. And Kate, I think we're about out of time, right?
Yes, we are. Thank you so
Alright.
much, Chris. If people do want to reach out, you obviously have your contact information up on screen, but I also put it in the chat box so people could copy and paste it directly.
And if you could drop the link to the invasive species sheets as well.
Yes, I did that as well. So
Fantastic.
hopefully people had a chance to open those links and start taking a look. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. This was very informative and obviously very interactive. There's a lot of interest in this topic. Thank you, Dan, for helping to moderate the questions and answers. At this point, we're about to take a break. Next up at 9 o'clock, we have From Fields to Features, Telling Stories of Conservation. This is going to be Zach from Fond du Lac County and our very own Kristen Teston from Wisconsin Land and Water. So come back at 9 o'clock.